In the shadows of the galaxy's deadliest war, one man holds the key to humanity's survival. In the heart of the galaxy's busiest marketplace, a single false signal was enough to change the fate of two lives. The crowd around Dock 12 moved like liquid metal under artificial suns, spilling between stalls stacked with alien silks, black market ordnance, and steaming trays of off-world food. Thaddeus Vale moved with them, tall, shoulders squared, despite the decades since his discharge. His hair was silver at the edges, his coat a faded Navy issue from a war half the galaxy had forgotten, but he never could. He had come to Calvess Station to disappear among smugglers and traitors. Instead, the signal had found him. It came through a private Terran Navy frequency, one that should have been dormant for over 20 years. That alone was enough to snap him out of his slow drift through the crowd. No one used that channel unless they had served under Fleet Command or wanted an ex-commander to think they had. The voice was clipped, panicked, and spoke of an asset in immediate danger of capture. He slowed his pace, eyes scanning the hollow beneath the vaulted docking spires. Who would know to bait him like this? Whoever it was, they had access to codes buried in decommissioned Navy archives. That meant resources, intelligence, and a reason to pull him into the open. He tapped the receiver on his wrist console, replaying the brief burst. The coordinates embedded in the transmission pointed to the lower decks, where Calvess's shadow economy thrived in plain sight, under the blind eye of its corrupt governance. The undermarket was no secret here. It operated under the same neon banners as legitimate trade, its auctions and dealings guarded not by secrecy, but by overwhelming local power. Buyers came for anything the interstellar accords forbade: weapon prototypes, alien bioforms, even fragments of restricted AI cores. Thaddeus found the auction site tucked behind a weapons bazaar, entry policed by broad-shouldered Vark mercenaries. He paid in chits without hesitation. Inside, the air was a mix of ozone and perfumed smoke. The room tiered in semicircles around a hollow-lit stage. Lots cycled in and out. Rare minerals, ship hulls stripped of transponders, even a cryopod containing something scaled and sleeping. It was the kind of market that reminded him of how fragile law became this far from core space. Then the announcer's tone changed, the way a predator's growl changes when prey appears. A girl stepped into the spotlight, her wrist bound with metallic filament, eyes darting but not panicked. Her skin was the deep turquoise of Nyvari heritage, hair white and unbound, catching the hollow light in a halo of silver threads. Thin, yes, but her movements carried an unnatural precision, like a soldier masking injury. Lot 41, the announcer's voice purred. Fully functional Nyvari specimen, unregistered, memory fractured, augmented, starting bid at? Thaddeus's eyes narrowed. Nyvari didn't end up here by accident. Their species had been scattered after the fall of Nyvari Prime, and those few surviving were either under treaty protection or hidden. This one, young, unarmored, memory wiped, was no accident, and when she turned slightly, a faint shimmer along the base of her skull caught his attention. The telltale subdermal glow of bio-integrated tech. He leaned toward the man beside him, a rail-thin traitor smelling faintly of reactor coolant. "Who brought her in?" The man shrugged. "The Black Bloc," he muttered, the Black Bloc in Terran tongue. "And if they're selling, she's either bait or a bomb." The words stuck with him. Bait, bomb, the signal. It was all too aligned to be chance. He raised his bitter slate without hesitation. 300, he said aloud, voice calm but firm, cutting through the murmurs. Somewhere behind him, the faint hiss of a comlink opening told him the trap was already springing. The moment Thaddeus caught the subdermal shimmer at the base of the girl's skull, the rest of the auction room faded into background static. It was not decorative augmentation. That faint rhythmic glow was the signature of a sealed biointegration port, the kind used for high-value military-grade implants. The old fleet tech manuals called them neural caskets, but the street name in darker circles was the design core. The design core was not a storage chip in the conventional sense. It was a living organ, cultivated from engineered synaptic tissue, designed to hold an evolving library of data. This one pulsed faintly, its bioelectric cycles hinting at constant encryption shifts. It was the sort of technology outlawed after the Treaty of Veles because it could carry self-replicating weapon schematics without any physical data drives. Whoever had implanted it into the Nyvari girl had done so with the precision of a war lab surgeon and the cruelty of someone willing to erase a person's mind to make room for dangerous knowledge. He didn't know the installer, but he knew the class of them, military contractors from the uncharted fringe, the sort who took the Black Bloc coin and left nothing but empty shells. The tech was so rare that only 3 known cores had surfaced in the past 50 years, and 2 of those had triggered system-wide security lockdowns. From the shimmer alone, he could guess the presence of a core. Her micro-expressions confirmed it. Momentary freezes, slight tremors along the jawline, all telltale signs of the body trying to reconcile organic processing with alien encryption load. Thaddeus's mind worked quickly. A smash and grab here would end in a bloodbath, and Calvess security wouldn't distinguish between rescuer and criminal. A straight purchase was cleaner, and if the Black Bloc had planted her here as bait, better to play the fish than scare off the angler. He loosened his coat collar, adjusted his bidder's slate to show a false merchant ID, credentials he'd built over months of drifting through the fringe. The profile marked him as Halvar Den, an arms broker with enough gray market reputation to be both feared and ignored. The risk was obvious. If the Black Bloc cross checked his face, the ex-commander's service record would glow like a beacon, but the crowd's greed was on his side. Most here saw only the credits in front of them, not the man behind the bid. He bid aggressively, skipping the small increments, making it clear he wasn't here to haggle. That alone discouraged half the room. The other half were careful not to outbid someone who looked like he could afford a grudge. Within minutes, the gavel dropped. The girl didn't speak as they unbound her wrists and handed her over. She stood too still, her gold irises fixed on a point beyond him. Not gratitude, assessment. "Do you understand me?" Thaddeus asked quietly as they stepped away from the stage. Her gaze shifted, meeting his for the first time. "Do you?" she said, voice soft but sharpened with something cold. He didn't answer. Not yet. He had plans. Find a secure dock, use a fleet-grade neural scanner he kept buried in his ship's medbay, and peel back the first layers of the core's encryption. He suspected what he'd find: fragments of classified military architecture, maybe even experimental fleet killers. And if his hunch was right, the Black Bloc hadn't just sold him a Nyvari girl. They'd handed him the most dangerous war asset in the sector, which meant, whether he liked it or not, he was already in the middle of a war that hadn't officially started. They didn't even make it to the docking lifts before the first shadow broke from the crowd. The Black Bloc never bothered with subtlety when they had numbers on their side. They were a coalition of ex-military operators, rogue scientists, and weapons syndicate enforcers. The sort of people who valued an asset like Leora for what she carried, not who she was. For them, the design core was worth fleets, regimes, maybe entire systems. The pursuit began in the lower transit concourse, the part of Calvess where the light from the upper decks died into a haze of dust and oil fumes. It was a bad place for a clean getaway. Ceiling-mounted cameras piped straight to private feeds, and every docking door was tagged with motion alarms. They came on foot at first, 6 operatives in reflective masks, moving with military precision. But behind them, Thaddeus caught the shimmer of hovering drone hounds, their sensor arrays sweeping for biometric locks. He'd known this might happen. The Black Bloc were too invested to just let a sail walk away. His hand was already on the compact EMP baton strapped beneath his coat. One quick pulse fried the nearest drone, sending it crashing into a row of stacked cargo crates. "This way," he muttered, steering Leora toward a side corridor. Calvess's dangerous corners were many, but he knew the ones where station security didn't bother to patrol. The pressure leak tunnels behind the recycling plants, the old zero-grav cargo wells where failed merchants stored unsold stock, and the deep service shafts that smelled of ozone and rust. Here, even the mercenaries tread carefully. Leora surprised him. She didn't stumble or freeze. She moved with sharp, deliberate steps, navigating the chaos like someone who'd studied it. At one point, she grabbed his arm and pulled him into a descending freight lift just before a pair of masked enforcers rounded the bend. "You knew they'd follow," she said under her breath. "I'd have been insulted if they didn't," he replied, half smiling despite the tension. The black market chaos worked in their favor. Screams rose from a nearby stall as a fire suppression system misfired, filling the air with choking foam. Traders shouted over each other, shoving crates of contraband into escape carts. In the crush, it became impossible for the bloc to use lethal fire without hitting bystanders. Still, they didn't get out unscathed. A ricochet from a plasma burst caught Thaddeus along the ribs, scorching the side of his coat. Leora took a grazing shock from a stun net. Her face tightened, but she kept moving. It was when he pulled her into the dim light of an abandoned maintenance bay that he noticed it. The stun burn on her forearm wasn't bleeding. It was knitting itself shut far too quickly. Smooth turquoise skin sealing without scar tissue. Underneath, for the briefest moment, a lattice of pale silver filaments pulsed like a second skeleton. "You're not—" He stopped himself, but the thought was already there. She met his gaze evenly. "Not what you expected?" "No," he admitted, and the honesty surprised him. If she was part synthetic, and by the look of it, deeply integrated, then the design core wasn't just implanted hardware. It was part of a larger construct, something engineered for more than passive storage. That made her infinitely more dangerous, and infinitely more valuable to the Black Bloc. And he was starting to suspect they knew exactly what she was. The medbay lights hummed softly, casting long, cold lines across Leora's face. Thaddeus had rigged the neural scanner into a diagnostic loop, letting the readings spill across a battered console. The display showed not just the telltale encryption cycles of the design core, it mapped the neural architecture wrapped around it, and what he saw made his pulse slow. Inside Leora was no ordinary cognitive map. The patterns were too structured, too deliberate. They matched historical archives of a single known mine, Cyril Vath, the Nyvari engineer whose shipyard innovations had once tipped the balance of the Orion conflict. Vath had been more than an inventor. She had been a strategist, designing vessels and weapon systems that operated like living organisms. Her death, 42 years ago in the siege of Nyvari Prime, had been considered a permanent loss to her people. Someone had not accepted that loss. They had reconstructed her mind from preserved engrams, layering them into a biosynthetic substrate, a living AI wrapped in organic tissue, and they had chosen to house it inside a young Nyvari form. The ethics of such a thing had been debated across the galaxy, but in most sectors, it was outright banned. Reconstruction risked more than copying. It risked distorting identity, creating someone who remembered a life that wasn't truly theirs. "Did you know?" Thaddeus asked quietly, eyes still on the scan. Leora's voice was slow. "I knew there were shadows in my thoughts, memories that didn't fit, but not who they belonged to. Within those shadows lay the death circuit. It was no crude superweapon. The schematics described an interlinked pulse cascade, a weapon capable of sending a harmonic disruption through faster-than-light drives. Entire fleets could be reduced to dead hulks in seconds, without a single hull breach. It was silent, invisible until activated, and irreversible. Vath had been the one to create the first iteration, though even she had sworn never to finish it. Whoever had rebuilt her mind clearly wanted that promise broken. With the design completed, war between the great powers would no longer be about numbers or firepower. One strike could erase decades of military buildup. "The Black Bloc sees it as a crown jewel," Thaddeus murmured. "They could hold entire star systems hostage." He stood there, caught between two instincts. One was the tactician's reflex, to secure and control the asset, dissect the weapon, and ensure it never fell into enemy hands. The other was the human impulse, to protect the girl sitting in front of him, who was more than the weapon she carried. His years in the Navy had trained him to think in outcomes, in acceptable losses. But since his discharge, he'd learned to measure cost in names, faces, and the weight of guilt. Leora watched him with a steadiness that unsettled him. She didn't plead or demand. She seemed to be waiting to see which side of himself he would choose. "If I keep you safe," he said finally, "I make myself the biggest target in this sector." "And if you don't?" she asked. He didn't answer. They both knew the alternative. If he turned her over or tried to use her, he wouldn't just lose her, he'd lose whatever was left of his own humanity. Thaddeus's ship waited in Dock 17, disguised among bulk freighters and salvagers. The Asterion was an old Terran scout corvette he'd won in a high-stakes barter on a mining outpost 3 years back. A vessel too outdated for military contracts but perfect for slipping through gaps in the law. Her hull plating was a patchwork of mismatched alloys, her drive core had seen better centuries, and her navigation suite predated most of the stations they'd pass. Still, she could make the jumps no one else dared, so long as you treated her like the temperamental relic she was. Before departure, Thaddeus ran quick modifications, bypassing civilian transponders, hard-locking the FTL drive into a pseudo-random jump pattern, and rigging a power shunt to mask their energy signature. He didn't aim for the core worlds. Too many eyes, too many ports under treaty surveillance. Instead, he plotted a course for the border worlds, those half-governed planets and outposts where frontier law was decided by whoever had the most firepower that day. Their information traveled slower than ships, and a Black Bloc bounty didn't mean instant capture. Leora sat strapped in the co-pilot seat, studying the star maps as if they were old memories. Perhaps they were. Many border worlds were littered with relics from the Nyvari diaspora, hidden caches, derelict stations, even refugee settlements where a stranger with the right face could pass unchallenged. Once in deep drift between jump points, Thaddeus brought out his neural link kit, a fleet-issue diagnostic frame, and a tangle of silvered interface leads. Leora hesitated only a moment before lowering the ports at her temple. The design core's encryption was layered like sediment, outer shells of false memories, inner seams of data lattices. He worked carefully, isolating fragments before letting them touch her conscious mind. The first mementos were harmless. Images of Nyvari Prime shipyards, voices in a language she didn't yet recall. Then came more dangerous pieces. Blueprint schematics half-rendered, weapon cycle equations that pulsed like living things. Each unlock risked triggering defensive feedback, neural seizures, data wipes, even core overheat. Thaddeus kept a stasis patch ready, knowing one misstep could fry both the core and the girl. Her reactions were muted at first, but as the fragments accumulated, something shifted. Her tone grew quieter when she spoke of the great orbital rings of her homeworld, of engineers who built fleets that sang in the void. Once she pulled away from the interface entirely, breathing hard, hands shaking. "It's like drowning in someone else's life," she admitted. They passed hours in that rhythm, scan, unlock, rest, until the work blurred into conversation. She told him about a dream she'd had of walking in an open-air market under orange skies. He told her about the last patrol he'd commanded before the Navy cast him out, the choice he'd made that cost men their lives. Neither shared everything, but enough to form a fragile bridge. And yet, he kept a careful line between them. Trust was a luxury he'd spent too often in the past, only to see it turned into a weapon against him. She sensed it, he could tell, the way her eyes lingered on him after a long silence, as if weighing the man she traveled with against the man who might one day decide she was too dangerous to keep alive. For now, though, they shared the same heading and the same enemies, and that was enough to keep their course steady into the dark. The clue came as a flicker in one of Leora's recovered memories, a sweeping view of a planet from orbit, ringed with shipyards that glowed like constellations. The star chart overlay matched one thing only: Nyvari Prime. Once it had been the jewel of her people, a world of coral blue oceans and crystalline cities strung along silver causeways. Thaddeus had seen it only in classified Navy footage, shot after its fall, the once proud rings reduced to drifting debris. In the war's last days, the Black Bloc and rival mercenary fleets had fought here over prototype weapons. The victors mined the ruins for years, then seeded the orbit with proximity mines and radiation beacons to keep scavengers out. "We're going there?" Thaddeus asked as he shut down the neural link. "It's where the memory points," Leora said, "and if Cyril Vaith left anything for herself, she'd hide it where no one dared return." Approach was slow, threading through narrow gaps between mine clusters. The Asterian sensors howled with interference, static dancing over the consoles. Thaddeus kept their vector low, slipping under the main orbital debris field until the cracked surface of Nyvari Prime filled the viewport. They landed in what had once been a great equatorial shipyard. Now it was a canyon of twisted alloy, shadows stretching over scorched ground. Broken spires jutted from the earth like ribs of some dead titan. Leora stepped onto the surface, her expression unreadable. "It doesn't feel like home," she murmured. "It feels like a grave." Among the ruins they found it, a weather-worn outbuilding half buried under collapsed hangar doors. Inside, beneath layers of hardened dust, was a data node still faintly pulsing. The casing was armored against both radiation and intrusion, its encryption sigil unmistakably Voth's. Thaddeus brushed his gloved hand over the surface. "She built this to last centuries." The files within were incomplete, but enough to reveal a darker truth. The death circuit could be adapted to disable planetary defense grids as easily as starships. That kind of power would turn entire worlds into open prey. By the time they sealed the node and returned to the Asterion, Leora's voice had dropped to a whisper. "If the Bloc knows this is here, they won't stop. They'll burn through the sector to get it." And Thaddeus knew she was right. Somewhere, Black Bloc sensors were already narrowing in on their position. The message hit every outlaw comnet in the sector within hours of their departure from Nyvari Prime. A single emblem, the jagged black triangle of the Black Bloc, flared across pirate feeds, mercenary boards, and encrypted bounty channels. The transmission was simple. Target priority 1, Thaddeus Vale and Nyvari female asset. Termination only. Full payment upon confirmation. No pretense of capture anymore. The shift to a kill order meant one thing. Leora's survival posed a greater risk than the data she carried. "Guess we're famous now," Thaddeus muttered, watching the hollow bulletin rotate in the dim light of the Asterion's mess. His jaw tightened. He'd been hunted before, but this was different. The Bloc had just told every hired gun in range that he was worth more dead than alive. Leora stood across from him, eyes fixed on the bounty sum. "That's more than they offered for the stolen dreadnought 2 years ago." "They're not pricing you," Thaddeus said. "They're pricing the war you could start." Soon names began surfacing. Crews with reputations so sharp they were whispered rather than spoken. The Iron Spire Syndicate, infamous for burning whole outposts to claim a single contract. The Valen Ghosts, who used cloaked skiffs and surgical boarding actions to eliminate targets in transit. One name made Thaddeus pause. Rax Harvin's crew, smugglers turned hunters, veterans of the border wars. He'd crossed them once, years ago, and left them with one less ship. They wouldn't forget. Their pursuers were armed for more than intimidation. Sensor-dampening stealth rigs, plasma-cast rifles tuned for vacuum kills, and swarm drones capable of tracking a single DNA signature through entire asteroid belts. For Leora, the price on her life wasn't abstract. She wrapped her arms around herself, voice low. "It's strange. To know my death is just a line on someone's ledger." "It's not your death they want," Thaddeus said, already running flight simulations in his head. "It's making sure no one else gets what you carry." He changed everything. Flight paths, supply stops, even the Asterion's visual profile. He reverted to Navy survival doctrine: unpredictability, misdirection, redundancy. It slowed their progress toward decoding the design core, but staying alive took priority. Leora adapted quickly, suggesting false data trails and using her partial memory of Nyvari stealth protocols to mask their drive emissions. They left caches of supplies behind, sacrificed their safest hideouts, and even dumped valuable salvage into the void to make it look like they'd been destroyed. Every move bought them a little more time, but also burned bridges they might need later. By the third day, Thaddeus knew they weren't just avoiding the Bloc anymore. They were surviving the attention of an entire sector's worth of predators. The Knox Belt was a graveyard born of a century-old slaughter. Once a thriving trade corridor, it had become a kill zone when 3 rival fleets clashed here in the War of the Four Crowns. Thousands of ships had torn each other apart, leaving behind a drifting ring of shattered hulls and volatile debris stretching millions of kilometers. Over time, magnetic eddies and radiation pockets had built an ever-shifting labyrinth that scrambled sensors and swallowed careless pilots whole. For anyone being hunted, it was the perfect place to disappear. No tracking system worked reliably here. Even the most advanced drone hounds would lose their signal in minutes. But the wreckage told stories. Gaping holes where reactors had blown, hulls twisted into grotesque shapes, scorched insignias of fleets that no longer existed. It was a place where the dead still kept their secrets. There's more than just the block to worry about, Thaddeus warned as the Asterion slid between the skeletal remains of a battlecruiser. Scavenger kings run parts of this belt, and the things they've rigged to these wrecks, you don't want to trip them. Leora's gaze lingered on the shadows between the hulks. Better the ghosts we can see than the hunters we can't. But there was one shadow Thaddeus couldn't ignore. Intelligence from a fringe contact suggested the Black Bloc had a base hidden deep inside the carcass of a Nytharian-class dreadnought. The ship was wedged into a cluster of debris so tightly that from a distance, it looked like just another casualty of the war. In truth, its internal bays had been rebuilt into hangars, barracks, and data vaults. The wreck's outer plating had been scorched to mask fresh repairs, and its heat signature was buried under the ambient radiation of the belt. Locating it meant following power bleed-off patterns, reading the faint hum of life support systems through the static. Thaddeus's readings narrowed the target zone to a 5-kilometer grid, close enough to try and approach, far enough that one wrong move could fry the Asterian's drives. When they closed in, Leora made her decision. If they have a base here, they have data. Data about me, about the core, maybe even about Vaith's work. You're talking about walking straight into a block stronghold, Thaddeus said sharply. It's suicide. She met his eyes, calm but resolute. Then we don't walk. We slip in, like a ghost. Her Nyvari heritage gave her an edge, an instinct for reading structural flows in ships, for finding maintenance routes others ignored. She could navigate ventilation conduits, bypass ancient security locks that still spoke her people's codes. If she succeeded, they could learn exactly how far the block's knowledge of the death circuit went, maybe even strike a blow at their operations here. Thaddeus hated the plan, but the thought of flying blind into the next trap was worse. In the belt, sometimes the only way forward was through the wreckage. They made it only as far as the inner service corridors before the trap snapped shut. From every junction, Black Bloc operatives emerged, masked, armored, rifles raised. Thaddeus counted at least 2 full squads, one sealing the access to the hangar, another blocking the route to the reactor spine. The rest fanned out along catwalks above, cutting off any vertical escape. A voice crackled over the corridor speakers, distorted but unmistakably block command. You've been useful, Vale. You found the last pieces for us. But now, you're a liability. Leora stiffened. They sold me just to see if someone could finish the decoding, she said, her voice low but edged with anger. And now that they have what they need, Thaddeus finished grimly, they're tying up loose ends. They'd been made when Leora's biometric tags tripped a dormant security node in the ventilation shaft. Old Nyvari tech, reprogrammed to sing out the moment it recognized her biosignature. The ring of steel around them tightened, forcing Thaddeus into a choice. Surrender and hope for a window later, or break the circle now and accept the cost. He chose the latter. Left side's thinner, he told Leora, shifting the pulse carbine to full discharge. When I move, you move. She nodded, fingers twitching against a small data spike hidden in her sleeve. The firefight erupted in the narrow hallway, every bolt of plasma ricocheting off the scorched walls. Thaddeus fought like he had in boarding actions years ago. Low stance, using the bulkhead struts for cover, driving the block operatives into each other's line of fire. Leora hacked into the local control grid, plunging half the corridor into darkness and sending overhead piping systems bursting with scalding steam. A round grazed Thaddeus' shoulder, numbing his left arm. Leora took a glancing hit to the side, but her synthetic systems absorbed the worst of it. The air filled with smoke, the scent of burnt alloy and insulation choking the narrow space. They'll keep coming, she gasped. Not if we bring the ceiling down, he said. The plan came from her. Reroute the reactor coolant overflow to overload the grav stabilizers, snapping the midsection of the ship like a brittle bone. She keyed in the override while Thaddeus covered her, his fire keeping the block's advance hesitant. When the overload hit, the corridor bucked, the floor tilting as bulkheads screamed under stress. "Move!" Thaddeus grabbed her arm, dragging her toward a maintenance hatch as the ship's spine tore open behind them. The explosion rolled through the dreadnought's carcass, vaporizing half the forward barracks and sending debris into the belt's chaotic drift. The block's pursuit faltered instantly. Whatever survivors there were would need time to regroup. And in the belt, time was everything. From the Asterian's cockpit, they watched the shattered wreck spin slowly into darkness. "You didn't just wound them," Thaddeus said. "You cut one of their hands off." Leora didn't smile. "Hands grow back. We need to keep moving." The last fragments of Vaith's mind fell into place aboard the Asterian, 3 days after the escape from the Nox Belt. The data pulled from the block's fractured archives completed the Death Circuit schematic. Leora studied it in silence, her golden eyes reflecting the shifting blue of the hollow display. The weapon was worse than Thaddeus had imagined, a cascading FTL disruptor that could rip the drive signatures from every ship in a system, turning battle fleets into drifting coffins. It didn't just disable, it erased the possibility of retreat, trapping entire populations under the guns of whoever held the trigger. "There's no way to dismantle it?" Thaddeus asked, leaning over the console. "Not without destroying the core," Leora replied. "And the core is me." They searched for alternatives, encrypting it beyond recovery, fragmenting the design into useless shards, burying it in the farthest reaches of the fringe. Every option failed under her own analysis. Given enough time, the block or another power would rebuild it. "That's why they wanted me alive," she said finally, her voice barely above the hum of the drives. "To finish it, and now they'll kill to make sure no one else can." He saw the realization settle over her like a weight she'd been avoiding. "If I wipe my memory, all of it, the death circuit dies with me." Thaddeus's reaction was immediate and sharp. "No, that's not a solution. That's suicide without a body. It's survival," she countered, "for everyone else." They argued in low, tense voices. He pushed for time, for some undiscovered angle, but she had already run the calculations. She spoke of the billions who would never know her name, but would live because the weapon never saw daylight. She spoke of identity not as something she owned, but something she could give up. "You think I'm just killing myself," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm not. I'm ending someone else. The ghost of Vaith that never should have been reborn." Her words cut deeper than he expected, because he knew she was right, and that she'd made her peace with it in a way he never could. The warning chime of the proximity sensors broke the moment. The block was less than an hour behind, their pursuit vector narrowing. Every choice they made now was measured in minutes, not days. She placed her hand on his. "You can't stop me, Thaddeus. You can only be here when it happens." For the first time since they'd met, he didn't have a plan. And in her eyes, he saw both the quiet terror of someone about to vanish and the unshakable resolve of someone who had already said goodbye. The object she pressed into his hand was no bigger than a coin, its surface matte black with a faint fractal pattern that shifted under the light. Thaddeus recognized the craftsmanship. Nyvari memory lattice, grown in a zero-grav nutrient sphere, capable of holding decades of sensory and cognitive data without degradation. A living archive in miniature. "It's locked," she said. "Only you can open it. Your biometric signature, plus a key I've embedded in your old Navy ident codes." He frowned. "You've had my codes this whole time?" "I had to be sure," she replied simply. "And now I am." She didn't explain why she trusted him, not in so many words. It was in the way she handed it over, as if she'd already decided he would carry something she couldn't anymore. He closed his fist around it. "I'll find another way. I swear to you." "You'll keep moving," she interrupted softly. "That's all I ask." The deletion process required her to interface directly with the core's maintenance routines. She lay back in the medbay cradle, interface leads snaking from her temples, chest, and spine. Thaddeus stood beside her, hands braced on the console. The display showed layers of encryption collapsing inward, memory partitions folding into null space. She didn't flinch. Her breathing slowed, her gaze never leaving his until the last seconds, when her expression softened into something almost like relief. "Tell me," she whispered, "that you'll remember me as I am now." "I will," he said. Then her pupils dilated. the gold fading to a flat, glassy sheen. The faint hum of the core in the scanners went silent. The medbay felt hollow, as if sound itself had been drained from it. He waited for some twitch, some involuntary blink that would mean she was still there. None came. The silence pressed in like a physical weight. He powered down the cradle, unfastened the restraints, and lifted her, light, far too light, in his arms. His next steps were already clear. Find someone with the skill and the willingness to rebuild her from what remained, even if that meant crawling through every black market lab and outlaw archive in the fringe. Carrying her to the cockpit, he set her gently into the crash seat beside his own. The Asterian's engines rumbled to life, and they slipped away from the dead station. Behind the control yoke, his jaw was set like stone. Whatever it cost, he would bring her back, not just because she carried the death circuit once, but because she had chosen to destroy it. It took him 3 days to work up the nerve to open it. The Nyvari memory lattice sat in the Asterian's dimly lit cockpit, a silent weight in his pocket until the moment came. He linked it to the ship's secure console, letting the encryption unfold along the biometric and ident key path Leora had set. The first images stopped him cold. Not Voth's visions, not technical schematics, but his own eyes staring out from a younger face, 25 years younger. The perspective was first person, recorded through a combat officer's neural log. He saw the campaign patch on his sleeve, heard his own voice issuing orders. The memory lattice had preserved not just the sights and sounds, but the thoughts, the unfiltered reasoning behind every decision. She had carried this all along, which meant she'd known exactly who he was and what he'd done before she ever spoke his name. The log detailed Operation Firefall, a deep strike mission at the tail end of the Nyvari conflict. The objective, neutralize an experimental research station believed to be developing fleet killer technology. Intel had been incomplete, and the chain of command had pressed for decisive action. Thaddeus had led the boarding team, his orders precise and merciless. What the reports never said, what the memory showed with brutal clarity, was that the facility was also housing civilian evacuees. Among them, a young Nyvari engineer named Leora Keth, the original. She'd been caught in the decompression when his team ruptured the outer habitat ring. In the logs, he'd registered her only as unidentified casualty. No face, no name, just another statistic in the action report. He leaned back in the pilot's chair, staring at the dark beyond the viewport. His stomach felt hollow, the old iron certainty of his service years rusting away in an instant. The next sequence in the data was quieter. A recent fragment, recorded from Leora's point of view. The reconstructed Leora. She was in the Asterian's medbay, reviewing the same combat log he had just seen. Her voice soft and certain. "He doesn't remember me. Not really, but I think I know him now. And I think he's not the man in these memories anymore." She had chosen to work with him, knowing this truth from the start. It wasn't naivety, it was judgment, of character, of change. The realization twisted in his chest. She'd seen the worst of him, and still decided he was worth trusting. That was more than he knew how to accept. For the first time in years, Thaddeus Vale doubted not just his past, but whether he deserved the chance to change it. The truth in the memory lattice burned deeper than any wound Thaddeus had taken in combat. It wasn't just guilt driving him now. It was the knowledge that Leora had seen the man he'd been, and still believed in the man he could become. That belief was a debt he couldn't leave unpaid. He knew there were technologies, outlaw biogenesis labs, fringe AI reconstruction bays, and unregistered Nyvari neural forges that might restore her. Each was dangerous, illegal, and priced in blood as much as in credits. The best of them were hidden in the free zones along the Ardent Rift, an expanse of lawless space ruled by syndicates who would sooner sell your ship than grant you safe harbor. There was no time for a long campaign. The longer her neural lattice sat inert, the harder it would be to recover any trace of her consciousness. He plotted an immediate course, his mind already running through the names of old contacts who might still owe him favors, or at least still tolerated him. The Black Bloc, however, wasn't going to let her body survive that long. A revived Leora could expose every detail of the Death Circuit project, including the Bloc's internal networks. They deployed kill teams outfitted with long-range grav mines and hunter-killer drones programmed to track the Asterian's drive signature down to the last decimal. Thaddeus countered with evasive jumps, masking his trajectory behind freighter convoys and venting false radiation trails. He stripped the Asterian of every non-essential component to boost speed and reduce sensor profile. Word reached him through encrypted back channels. An old smuggler named Varen and a Terran deserter medic named Kale agreed to run interference on his flank. The final clash came at the edge of the rift, in the skeletal remains of a mining habitat abandoned decades earlier. The Bloc's assault ships emerged from the rift shadows, their ion cannons lighting the debris field in white-blue arcs. Thaddeus anchored the Asterian against a derelict strut and lured them into the narrow lanes between shattered ore processors. The corridors of broken metal became kill zones, every turn funneling the Bloc into crossfire from jury-rigged auto turrets he'd planted hours before. One by one, their ships fell silent, hulls venting atmosphere into the rift's dark. By the time the last hunter drone was slagged against an asteroid surface, the Bloc had lost half their strike wing. The survivors broke off, leaving the rift to the ghosts. For the first time since Leora's memory wipe, Thaddeus had breathing room. The path ahead to the Nyvari neural forges was still dangerous, but now it was open, and with it, a chance to bring her back. He set the Asterian's course into the rift, the fractured stars outside shimmering like a promise. Calvess shrank into a glimmering ember behind them, its vast market rings dissolving into the starfield. Thaddeus had chosen the long arc around the Thalian drift, a route of empty sectors and uncharted jump relays where even the most persistent bounty hunters hesitated to follow. The Asterian limped through the void, her patched hull bearing the scars of the rift battle, carbon scoring along her starboard flank, 2 reactor conduits jury-rigged from scavenged parts, and a navigation system that flickered like a candle in the wind. In the crash seat beside him, Leora's body rested in a secured harness, her face serene, as if simply sleeping. The memory lattice lay in his jacket pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. The first stop would be the Nyvari neural forges hidden in the far arcs of the rift. From there, he'd work his way through every outlaw technomancer, rogue AI architect, and fringe biogenesis expert willing to trade skill for trust or credits. His last glimpse of Calvess wasn't of the towering market spires or the neon glow, but of the shadows that clung to every deal, every whispered name in the undermarket. It was a reminder of how easily life became currency here. He'd left shadows of his own behind in darker places. Operation Firefall. The mistakes that had cost lives and forged the man who could stand here now, determined to undo what he'd done. The vow he carried was more than a mission. It was a reckoning. Resolve steadied him in a way no command post ever had. He knew the path ahead was a gauntlet, every contact a gamble, every jump a possible trap. But each move would be deliberate. He would not run from the past. He would walk into it, eyes open, until there was nothing left to hide from. He thought of what might come back if Leora could be revived. Would she remember everything? Vath's genius, the death circuit, the long chase across the stars? Or would she wake as someone new, someone without the weight of what had been lost? The fear was there, sharp and quiet, that she might look at him with no recognition, or worse, with the same judgment as the woman he'd once killed. But even that fear felt worth facing, because bringing her back was not only about her survival, it was proof that people could change, that he could change. And perhaps years from now, some spacer in a distant port would tell a story of a disgraced commander and the Nyvari girl he carried through the Black and wonder if it was just a myth or a truth too strange to fade. In the cold silence between stars, the Asterian cut its path into the unknown, a lone ship bearing the weight of 2 lives, one awake, one waiting to return. Thaddeus kept his eyes on the shifting constellations, each jump taking him farther from the man he had been, and closer to the man Leora had believed he could be. The memory lattice rested against his heart like a pulse not his own, its secrets both a burden and a promise. Somewhere ahead lay the forges, the keys to undoing death in all but name. He didn't know if she would come back the same or if she would know him at all, but he would see her open her eyes again. And when she did, she would find him there. Not as her executioner, but as the one who refused to let her story end.